So good afternoon. I said good afternoon. So when I was growing up, my parents allowed me to watch far too much TV. And one thing that I got to watch, and now that I have kids myself, I'm kind of wondering why my parents ever let me watch it, was the news coming out of New York City. And I was growing up in State College, Pennsylvania. For any of you who know anything about State College, it's a small college town in the middle of the state. And that news opened every night with a statement, "It's 10 p.m. Do you know where your children are?" I'm not sure that people in the audience are old enough to remember that catchphrase. But I didn't get it. Why did you need to know where your children are? Obviously, everyone knew where their children were. But again, I was growing up in State College, Pennsylvania, where the worst crime that happened was some college student stealing someone's bike, and where we had very strong schools. And it wasn't until a little later in my life that I realized that as a young black man, even though I was growing up in State College, Pennsylvania, that my life was intertwined with theirs in every way possible. That there was nothing about the fact that I had gone to good schools and that my parents had good jobs that was going to separate me from every other black youth there was. And so I made it my job, my life's goal, to help out, not because of some necessarily altruistic purpose, but because it was personal. Was because what happened to the young man on the streets of Cleveland and New York City and San Francisco was going to impact how I was treated. The same reason why those young men got stopped by the police was the same reason that despite my college degree, I would get stopped by the police. It's the same reason why, regardless of what degree I held, I would get followed around stores. It's the same reason why I'm in law school, driving through Chicago, get pulled out of a car by undercover cops, patted down, car searched. Police find nothing, they walk away, tell us to move along. My life was inextricably intertwined with their lives. And now that I have kids, the passion is even stronger, because I have a 12-year-old little boy who is going to have to deal with these same issues unless we fix them. And I have an 8-year-old little girl who's going to have to lift herself up unless she feels that this country is going to have confidence in her ability to be strong and to do well. So I wish I could say that I'm doing all of this just because it's the altruism in my heart, but I'm doing it because it's personal, and because it matters to me personally, and it impacts my life personally. And the President of the United States gets this. He's gotten it from the time he was a community organizer, if not before then. But about a year ago, he set up something called the Office of Urban Affairs, Justice, and Opportunity. And I have the honor to head that office. And what it was a realization that we have to break down the silos that we work in. That there is no criminal justice solution to inequality and poverty and struggle. That there is no civil rights solution, no housing solution, no labor solution, no human services solution. That unless we bring all of those things together, there is no solution. We are not going to fix the problems. We must break down those silos. So you cannot talk about juvenile justice reform if the parent doesn't have a job, if there's not equal pay for the women who are working those jobs, if there's not scheduling that allows flexibility for people who are trying to raise their kids. You can't have juvenile justice if you don't have a house to live in. You have to open the doors to education and not kick kids out of school. So one of the things I also get to work on is the My Brother's Keeper initiative. And it was a year ago, February, that the president announced this initiative, coming on the heels of yet another shooting death of a young black man. Coming on the heels of that shooting death, the president surprised a number of people when he came up, and I hope many of you saw this, to the podium in the media room to talk about the murder of Trayvon Martin. And how important it was that we provide a door for all these young men who were struggling, who were facing these long odds, who everywhere they went were thought of with suspicion. And out of that feeling and that speech became the My Brother's Keeper initiative, which I've had the honor to be a part of the task force on. And so what is this initiative? What does it do? Well, it says that if we're going to have success, we have to have equality of opportunity. That we can deal with disparate outcomes, but we shouldn't be dealing with disparate beginnings. So it has 6 main pillars. Kids have to be ready for school in the first place. Kids have to be reading at grade level by the 3rd grade. Kids need to be graduating from college. Kids need to be going to post-secondary school and or getting the skills to succeed in the workforce. That all youth need to take on jobs and be employed, and that we need a criminal justice and juvenile justice system that is fair. And he brought together all of government. Every single domestic agency came to the table to talk about what they could do to improve the life chances for boys and young men of color and their peers. Everyone was brought to the table because you really had a Department of Labor that worked right here, and a Department of Education that worked right here, and a Department of Justice that worked right here. And as I said before, that doesn't work. And I know that I'm not just speaking to the choir right now, but I'm preaching to the preachers right now, because I know that you all get this. That in your communities you get this. And so when we're talking about the youngest of the young getting ready for school in the first place, what can we do with home visiting programs to build them up and make them better, to make sure that parents can be better parents? When we're talking about reading by the 3rd grade, what are we doing to make sure that teachers and schools and parents have the tools that they need to make sure that their kids can actually read at grade level by the 3rd grade? When we're talking about high school, why is it that Black and Latino and Native American boys are getting kicked out of school for the same reasons that other kids get congratulated for or said, oh, that was a neat little prank or joke? That when it comes to getting those skills, that we have to open the doors to apprenticeships and summer jobs, and making sure that all youth realize the value of work and realize the possibilities. That when we're talking about succeeding in the workplace, how do we make sure that when someone gets that job, that there's a ladder to climb, that you're not stuck in one place the whole time? And when we're talking about the criminal justice system, how do we make sure that communities and police officers are able to work together, talk together, build a community together, and you get rid of that warrior mentality from law enforcement and build into that the guardian mentality of, I am going to protect my community, and bring all youth together to do that. And so in our 1-year report, we started talking about that. We started putting together the pieces of that and announcing the things that had come about because the president had the vision to start the My Brother's Keeper initiative. Now, a lot of this work was happening already, but it wasn't happening in this way. And it brought together philanthropies that have already committed more than $300 million toward this effort. And it brought together your communities. So it issued a community challenge that 186 communities around this country, 43 different states have taken on to take on those 6 milestones, to say we are going to come up with a plan to help those who need the greatest help, which in many communities are the boys and young men of color. So we're going to put together a plan, and half the battle is just putting together that plan, is to start thinking about that, is to have the police chief sitting next to the school superintendent, sitting next to the mayor, sitting next to the head of Health and Human Services, and having that conversation that it's unbelievable rarely happens. How is it that you have all these people working in government on many of the same issues and they never talk? Well, that's half the battle of this community challenge. It's what we do with promise zones. So there are 5 promise zones right now around the country, in Oklahoma and southeastern Kentucky and Los Angeles and Philadelphia and San Antonio. And it says, how do we bring together resources to deal with concentrated poverty? How do we bring together the resources that are going to help to lift up those who have the hardest time? And we all know that when you start with all these challenges, how hard it is to get back up, that it becomes this spiral. So we have this school discipline guidance. I hope you guys have read it. And if you haven't, I ask you to pull this up. How do we stop suspending and expelling our kids unnecessarily? Because once you suspend that child, and we've seen it with kids as young as 4 years old. Now, I know many of you were once 4 years old. I suspect that you did something that you shouldn't have done. Hopefully you didn't get expelled from school for it. Hopefully there was some adult who understood it, who got it, some teacher who made sure that you were okay and set you on the right path so you could sit at these tables here today and do the work that you're doing here today. But for too many kids, that's not what happens. They get kicked out, they get labeled, and then the spiral begins. And that spiral, you get kicked out of school, you fall behind, school becomes uninteresting, you end up in the juvenile justice system that has no interest in making sure that you get back on your feet, doesn't have the programming set, not the educational, the mental health, the skills programming. You go back into school, you fail again, you're lost. Well, we can't keep doing that to our kids. And if we start even before 21, I get that the name of the conference is by 21, but if we start immediately, we can do so much better and make this world a better place and ensure that there is equality at the beginning. Because, I started off talking about the impact that this has on my life and why this work is personal to me. But it should be personal to all of us. Because that young black boy in New York has an impact on that executive in Silicon Valley. Because that's one fewer person who is competing for that job. That's one fewer person who is adding to the economy. That's one more person who may potentially get involved in a life of crime. Again, I'm talking to people who know this and get this, but I need you to get that message out there. I need you to take the school discipline guidance and take it to your school superintendent and take it to your mayor and ask them what we are doing as a community. As the president recently said in his speech in Selma, the most important word in the American Constitution is we. We the people. We is the most important word. And we together have to take the work that's been done. We also have a task force on 21st century policing. just issued a report, 60 recommendations on how to ensure that communities and police work together better. We brought together youth, gave them a voice, law enforcement, academics, civil rights advocates. 60 recommendations. I ask you to take a look at that report, get a hold of that report, go to your mayor, go to your police chief, go to your community meeting and ask, what are we doing as a community to ensure that the police can go home to their families at the end of every shift, and that the community feels safer because that police officer is working that shift. There's a lot of stuff out there, and there's a lot of work that's being done, and there's a lot more work to be done. We also have to think about how we lift up the young men and women who were here earlier even higher, because they get it. We forget that sometimes those who appear to be succeeding can use a little boost up, but we don't always have to talk about those who are failing or struggling the most. So we have to celebrate achievement while at the same time lift up those who are struggling. So though they got rid of that catchphrase, it's 10 o'clock, do you know where your children are? I ask all of you to remember it. To remember it and ask every day, where are my children? Where are our children? What more can we do to ensure their success in the future? So I thank you very much.